and gentlemen, good evening. It is my very great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's webinar on Brexit. I hope you're all safe and sound, feeling okay, and ready to assist to a discussion and an exchange of point of views. I think that's going to be very, very interesting. Brexit, level playing fields, fish, and the way forward. That's the topic we're going to talk about. Fish, level playing fields. It reminds a little bit a meeting we had about a year ago that was also very, very, very interesting. So my name is Daniel Eischen. I'm chair of the British Chamber of Commerce. And as I say, I'm very happy to welcome you here tonight. Please let me immediately thank very much our partner and sponsor for this evening's event, Luxembourg Times. So when we decided to organize this evening event, they were very interested and very active supporting us in organizing this. So thank you very much for your support, and thank you also for being with us here tonight. Yes, when we started this new year 2020, we all knew that after already a number of years where we talked about Brexit and we had regular meetings about Brexit, conferences, we had our Brexit breakfast briefings together with the ambassador. We knew that this would be the final year, that at the end of this year, we would move over to another form of relationship between Europe and the UK. So we knew that over this year, we would talk a lot about this and Brexit would be on people's mind. We were not aware at that point in time that there would be another crisis that would have a very tight grip on us over most of this year and surely also over the months that are still ahead of us, COVID. So again, I hope that you're all doing fine, that you're all safe and sound. But Brexit, of course, is very important. We're coming closer and closer to New Year's Eve, to the 31st of December. So it's interesting to have a chat together to see where are we, what happened over the last weeks, what can we expect from the days ahead, what are the different points of view that are confronting each other, what are the expectations that we could have. And that's why I'm really happy tonight to have with us on one side Ambassador John Marshall, the English ambassador, who's going to speak in just a couple of seconds. And then we'll have a roundtable discussion after that that's going to be moderated by Luxembourg Times. So welcome, and without further ado, I would like to welcome John Marshall. John, if you would like to join me, that would be really great.
Hi, Dan.
Hey, good evening. Good to have you here. Perfect. Thanks for your support. Thanks for being again available for our members, for our guests, for all the people who are with us here tonight. And thanks for your continued support over the last years and over the last months as well in everything we do at the British Chamber of Commerce, but also in everything which is related to the Brexit discussion. So I would very much like to immediately hand over to you and let you a little bit do an introduction presentation on where we are with Brexit. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the very kind words in introducing me, Dan. I'm going to say a little bit about the negotiations, a bit about business preparing for the end of the year, a little bit more about financial services, and then I will say something about mobility and some tips for the UK nationals amongst you, actions you might want to take, might need to take before the end of the year. So on the negotiations first, I mean, the two sides have been meeting every day now, just about since the 22nd of October. So we're in a very intense stage of the process, and confidentiality is very important as a result, and that's why very little is being said in public at the moment by either side. We obviously welcome the fact that during the last fortnight of negotiations, progress has been made. It's obviously good that talks are continuing, and I think both sides recognise that the deal is in our mutual interests. So progress has been made in a number of areas. including law enforcement, for example, one of the areas where there's been some good progress in recent weeks. And that's just a helpful reminder, I think, that these talks aren't just about free trade agreement, not just about trading goods and services, but also about other issues such as aviation, road haulage, nuclear cooperation, internal security matters, etc., etc. And at long last, these intensive discussions are now also being based on legal text, which is really important. And a lot of text has been agreed, but there's still quite a lot of text which is in square brackets. And while progress has been made, significant gaps remain in the three areas that you will be very familiar with. The difficult areas from the outset, those of governance, level playing field, including state aid and fish. And the UK is willing to be constructive. We've shown flexibility, but our fundamental negotiating principles remain. And we've always been clear from the outset that any deal must be compatible with our sovereignty and allow us to take back control of our laws, our trades, and our waters. We're not going to lock ourselves into EU rules or accept any kind of dynamic alignment. And that, as I say, has been our consistent position from the start. And there's a need for compromise on both sides. So the EU are also going to need to move if we're going to bridge the remaining gaps on these three most difficult areas. And if the EU isn't able to show that flexibility, then I think a deal will be impossible to achieve. It's always been our wish, our strong preference, that we should conclude an agreement with a suite of agreements with a free trade agreement at its core. We've worked hard to that end since the negotiations started in March, and we will continue doing so in the final days that remain. And let's see what the next few days brings. But whether we end up with an agreement or not, the UK will be leaving the customs union and the single market on the 31st of December, and there are a series of guaranteed changes for which UK and EU businesses need to prepare. This is a message that we are making consistently to our business, in which the Luxembourg authorities are also making to business here, as a point, for example, that the Foreign Minister, Jean Asselborn, made in his annual foreign policy speech to Parliament last week. And on our side, on the British government side, in addition to our sort of domestic facing campaign, which outlines the steps that UK businesses need to take to prepare, we also launched back in September, I think it was, a new communications campaign to help EU businesses get ready for the end of the transition period, so they can continue trading smoothly with the UK. And the Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce here is also hosting regular events, and they recently hosted one in partnership with the Belgian Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce in London, which basically featured a whole series of British government officials from the Cabinet Office, from DEFRA, from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, from HMRC, talking the Luxembourg business audience through the changes that will be, which will come into force at our borders, everything around customs, formalities, export declarations, sanitary and phyto sanitary controls, food labeling, traffic management systems, etc. So we all know that a good chunk of British business or businesses on both sides of the channel are ready. Others, I think, still need to do a bit more, but hopefully everything that people need to do will be in place by the end of this year. Now, on financial services, I think I'd like to say three things. I mean, first of all, as most of you all know, financial services isn't really covered in the free trade agreement, and the future UK-EU relationship on financial services will largely be covered by equivalence decisions by either side. And earlier this month, we announced as many equivalence decisions as we could for the EU and EA states in advance at the end of the transition period. I think there were about 17 decisions that we took. But there are some decisions that don't make sense in a non-reciprocal scenario. We're waiting for the EU to give greater clarity about its intentions for the majority of their decisions relating to the UK, and we remain open to dialogue, and hopefully there can be some reciprocal, additional reciprocal decisions. Secondly, you'll have seen, I'm sure, that both in June and earlier this month, the Chancellor has made announcements about the future of the UK financial services industry. In June, the government announced a series of immediate practical reforms that the UK needs to take to prepare our financial sector and regulatory framework for a future outside the EU. These reforms aim to update our prudential requirements, maintain the soundness of our capital markets, and manage upcoming risks. The approach is guided by our continued commitment to the highest international standards and what is right for the UK's complex and highly developed markets, and also what is necessary to ensure financial stability and to protect consumers. So there will be early changes to some regulations, but all for entirely sensible reasons. And then earlier this month, he announced a new chapter for the UK financial services sector with a vision of an open, green and technologically advanced industry with some key announcements, including issuing the UK's first sovereign green bond and making TCFD-aligned disclosures mandatory across the economy by 2025. And you'll be hearing more and more from us on climate-related issues as we have the presidency of COP26, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which we're hosting in Glasgow next year. For example, yesterday, the Prime Minister announced a 10-point plan, which included the news we'll be bringing forward the phase-out of fuel or of diesel and petrol vehicles by 10 years to 2030. So climate change will be the single biggest, I think, international priority for the UK in 2021. Finally, on financial services, the UK authorities have taken all the action we can to mitigate risks of disruption to cross-border financial services at the end of the transition period, whatever the scenario, including in areas where there are no equivalence decisions. And these include confirming the temporary permissions regimes, a regime which will apply from the end of the transition period is something that was put in place for the events that we left the EU without a withdrawal agreement. That will apply. And as you all know, UK firms have been carrying out extensive preparations to minimise the risks of disruption relating to the loss of passporting rights at the end of the transition period, and to ensure they continue to do business with the EU. So, in short, I think the financial services sector is one which is very well prepared for the end of the transition period, and that's certainly the message I get when I talk to contacts in the sector. Quick word about mobility. People are always asking what it's going to mean in terms of visas, and I think there we have quite a few things which are known and a few things which are unknown. What we know is that UK visitors to the EU will be allowed to come here for 90 days in a period of 180 without a visa. For EU visitors to the UK, they will not need a visa for periods up to 6 months. Those short-term visits are for reasons of tourism, short periods of studies, some business activities, attending meetings, conferences, things like that, intra-corporate activities. But it's worth looking at the list of permitted activities in the immigration rules, so you better understand exactly what business activities are permitted and what aren't. If your plan is to move to settle and to work, then if you're moving from the EU into the UK, then you will need to apply for a visa under our new points-based immigration scheme. and the possibility of doing that will become open from the 1st of December, but this is only for those who are arriving after 1st of January. And if you're traveling in the other direction, from the UK to Luxembourg, you will need to get an autorisation temporaire de séjour before you leave the UK. What we don't know really is the bit in the middle, what sort of, I mean, the ability to go to the UK, for example, or from the UK to the EU to carry out business services which are not included in the list of permitted activities, and that is because that is currently subject to negotiation as part of the services part of the free trade agreement. So we'll need to wait a little bit longer to find out what the outcome of that is. And finally, a few bits of practical advice for UK nationals who are legally resident in Luxembourg. I'm sure most of you have heard me say this before, but please do, if you need to, please do apply for your new residence card. And you will need to if you are a UK national that doesn't have another EU nationality, and if you're currently here on a carte de séjour as opposed to a carte de légitimation, which is what people who work in the international organizations tend to have. So you have until the end of June, but I would really advise you to get in your application as soon as possible. Secondly, if you're still using a UK driving license, exchange it before the end of this year. You'll still be able to use it for next year, but you will, in the course of next year, need to convert it, and that's a slightly more complicated procedure that involves a medical check. Thirdly, check the validity on your passport to ensure you have 6 months. That won't be necessary to come in and out of Luxembourg if that is where you are legally resident, but 6 months validity will be necessary for other visitors or for Luxembourg residents if they're traveling to other parts of the EU. And things will change at the airport here. UK nationals won't be able to use e-gates and EUQ. So if you're in the habit of leaving everything to the last minute and dashing through the airport, just be conscious that things may take a little bit more time. So set off just that little bit earlier would be my advice, particularly in the early months while the system settles down. So that's all from me, and I look forward to listening to the roundtable discussion.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much for that update, very detailed update. I am sure it's good to hear that you're going to stay with us during the roundtable, because I've seen already a couple of questions coming in. So I would not like to ask them already now, and I would like to invite all of you have questions now for the ambassador, but also questions to our panelists in the minutes to come. Please use the Q&A function that you have on your screen in the Zoom application. You can use the Q&A in order to ask questions. Then they will, of course, be then asked at the end of the panel discussion. So I would very much like to hand over to Zuzanna. Zuzanna, journalist at Luxembourg Times, and Zuzanna is gonna host the roundtable discussion. Good evening, Zuzanna. Good to have you here. Good evening, Dan. Thank you for the introduction. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us. My name is Zuzanna Reda-Jakima. I'm a reporter with Luxembourg Times, and I have the pleasure to moderate today's panel discussion. To be honest, when I first saw the date of our event a month ago, more or less, I thought that by now we would have at least some elements of the Brexit deal cleared as per the mid-November deadline. And I optimistically assumed our meeting would focus on sharing cod and haddock recipes, exchanging our favorite fishing spots as per the crucial element of the negotiations. But well, I was wrong, and nothing is clear, and we keep on groping for clues about how relations between the EU and Britain will look like in 6 weeks. And hence I suggest that our discussion takes a slightly different angle.
In today's 40-minute meeting, I will have the pleasure to debate with 4 seasoned experts about how the UK's decision to leave the EU has been changing and will keep on changing dynamics in the financial industry. So allow me to introduce our 4 panelists. Martin Hollywood, partner at PwC Luxembourg. Hello, Martin.
Hello.
Nicolas Mackel, the CEO of Luxembourg for Finance. Nicolas, hello.
Good evening.
James Martin, who is joining us from the UK. He's the Director of Policy at the British Chambers of Commerce. Hello, James.
Evening, hi.
And Jérôme Wigny, partner at law firm Elvinger Prussen here in Luxembourg. Hello, Jérôme.
Good evening.
Gentlemen, I would like to start in a simple manner. Do you still believe that we will see a deal before the end of the year? And what if we don't see one? James, if you could maybe start with your UK perspective, and then our Luxembourg panelists will comment on your thoughts.
Of course, thank you, Susan, and thank you to everybody for joining us. It's, as you say, a really interesting time. I hope in January we'll be able to share haddock and cod recipes freely, certainly with sensible data. So it's the great unknown, of course, isn't it? We are within weeks to go before one of the biggest geopolitical transitions of several generations, and we're not sure the basis on which the UK is leaving, and that's a wee bit worrying. There are broadly, I suppose, 3 scenarios. I think we all know this. One is there is a deal. I suspect at best it's going to be what we call a reasonably thin deal, which probably will be built up over time as things evolve and shift and priorities change. Second, we go with a slightly thicker deal, which covers a wider range of things, but I think we're probably not headed down that path for too long for that to be a reasonable possibility. Or second or third, there is no free trade agreement. The UK leaves, and then there is a fairly frantic scramble to do a series of side deals that keep the bare minimum of things going, so planes can take off, etc., etc. I suppose the billion-dollar question, certainly if you're running a hedge fund or similar, is which of those feels most likely? And there one has to take the signal from the noise, because the media, and I'm sure the Luxembourg Times are rigorously independent, but the media, all sorts of organizations like my own, have been used as amplifying boards by both sides to create a hubbub around this that is seeking to drive domestic political viewpoints in a sensible direction. That's just the nature of the beast. I would lay my money on there being a deal. I would hope that we would see it in outline within a fortnight. And then, of course, there's a frantic race to do 2 things. One is to turn it into agreed technical text. I understand a lot of that's done, but there are still significant parts outstanding. And then 2 is for businesses on both sides of the channel, across all sectors, to try and get ready for it. There are a lot of things we can do now. Some of them won't change, but there are huge areas of detail that we just don't know, and that is a serious risk. And so there are some questions around exactly how and when that deal switches on in various places and what the do nothing situation would be. But I must stress there's no promises there, I'm afraid. It really is a bit of a crapshoot in terms of where we end up. But I suspect it's going to be a relatively thin deal with a little bit on services, maybe something on security cooperation, something on Erasmus and things like that. But essentially it will be, I suppose, pretty thin, and probably not where arguably some people thought we might be when the vote was being taken all those years ago.
Thanks, James. And Nicolas, how optimistic are you?
Well, I share in James's prudent optimism. I think the circumstances that favor a deal to be struck have somehow increased through the election of Joe Biden. I think that Mr. Johnson has now understood that that element definitely adds pressure on him to strike a deal, because not only Mr. Biden is very adamant that there should be no damage to Ireland, or at least peace in Ireland, but I think if Mr. Johnson were to slam the door of the EU in a no-deal scenario, wrap himself in the Union Jack, and then travel over to Washington, the reception he would get would not necessarily be conducive to concluding a favorable trade deal with the US. This being said, I think all options are still unfortunately there. Mr. Johnson needs to compose not only with that element, but also with, as he has for the last 4.5 years, and the previous government as well, with the more extreme faction of his party on the Brexiteer side. So we will see. Ultimately, I do believe in good old EU fashion that there will be a deal struck somewhere just before dawn, where we will see a trade-off between cod quotas against MiFID equivalences, so that everybody can claim some sort of victory. And yeah, that's probably somewhere out what will be the outcome. I think that one thing we need to correct, it will not be a thin deal, because what I've read is that the deal by now has 1,800 pages, the substance of it though being a little bit light.
Correct. Yeah, thank you, Nicolas. Martin, if I could ask for your view, I'm pretty sure that in a global company, you surely have discussed it more than once, and you have views from your colleagues in the UK, your own views. Where would you bet your money? Martin?
Sorry, that was for me. Rather boringly, I'd have to agree with the other two who've already spoken on this, Nicola and James. I think there will be some degree of a deal. It would not be what everyone would have wanted after hearing the result of the vote in 2016. But I think there will be something on paper. I just think, politically speaking, it just will not look good on either side if there is nothing. And they will want to have something which they can wave at the cameras to say, we've done a deal, and then wait for wait to see actually what little is in there. And then I think it will be in the years to come where everything is more detailed. Things are agreed.
Jérôme, I would now like to ask a more specific question to you, because Luxembourg has seen quite some positive developments in the Brexit aftermath. So we attracted quite a number of big insurance companies and asset managers who set up shops here. Other companies have been moving mostly back office roles, but also more prominent ones. Do you think that there's still more to win for Luxembourg from Brexit, and if there can be some other roles, being moved here in the next months or years?
Yes, common sense is that the UK, at the end of the day, will be treated like Switzerland or like the US. And in the area of financial services, and particularly investment funds, those countries have retained their portfolio management capacity. Managers are still based in the US or the UK or Switzerland. But if you think about it, US managers, in order to be successful in the EU, had to choose a European hub. And historically, that hub was London. And so I believe the UK will have to do the same over time. So they will have to have a hub in the EU. It could be Luxembourg, either because they would base marketing teams in Luxembourg, or because Luxembourg would serve as a coordination center for marketing or supervision center. But I believe that is clearly one of the activities that Luxembourg could attract.
James, Nicolas, if we could follow on Jérôme's point, in what other areas do you expect the dynamics between, but the business dynamics changing? I was thinking, probably the travel might be reversed. So now it will not everyone be going to London to sign deals, but maybe London will need to come to the continent. As Jérôme mentioned, that with London losing the hub status, I would say mainly in the eyes of US funds, which when they want to market in Europe, well, now they have to come to other countries as well. But at the same time, for Europe, losing London means that in a way, it's the allure of being a one-stop shop is being lost. So how do you think? I mean, are these good directions that I'm looking at? Maybe there will be a growth of some other Eastern European countries' role, or India or other markets that Europe has to address. James, Nicolas, if you would like to share your views.
No, of course, thank you, Julia. So I'll jump in first, and it's a really good question. And part of that is fundamentally unknowable because we don't know the shape of the deal in the future. And in a way, the pandemic has intervened and may have more of a reshaping effect than we imagine if it leads to much more working from home. I've not done one of these before in my bedroom, so there you go. It just goes to show we're crossing the new Rubicon. I'm very much hoping a small blonde 5-year-old doesn't come running through shouting about bath time or what have you, which is always a risk these days. So that may well reshape things in the short to medium term as much as Brexit does in terms of movement patterns. If people aren't necessarily going in person in quite the same way anymore, that does shift things quite a lot. Having said that, I would be surprised if Brexit didn't lead to some transition from the UK into continental markets, into the EU. It will depend on the strength of the bilateral and multilateral bonds that have been created, which the ambassador set out much more fluently than I ever could earlier on. I think the UK is really very genuine in its desire to remain a core part of the European financial system in a lot of ways, in every way that is compatible with its sovereignty. I suppose the question is, where does that lie on the margins, and where do those two things interface? And secondly, how much do big multinational companies price in global risk? And then, of course, beyond that, there's a whole tranche of points that aren't really anything to do with Brexit, I suppose, in a way. London is seen as safe. The courts are good. You can abide by the decisions, etc., etc. Now, that is fundamentally the case for all of the EU, I'm sure, but there are some questions on the margins, and I know plenty of lawyers who would say that London is a great place to do business for exactly that reason. Will staff, when it comes to it, actually move to other places, uproot their children, or will they be able to push back? It depends on all sorts of internal discussions. So over time, I would say that probably will be that shift, but it's very difficult to say which roles, and it's very difficult to say how quickly, and other factors will intervene, which is a very long-winded way of saying I'm not sure, I'm afraid, but it will be interesting, to say the least, finding out. But I'm sure Nicolas has a much more refined analysis than I do.
I wish. Let me make maybe 3 brief points. I think my starting point is that, obviously, to me at least, to many other people probably as well, Brexit is a lose-lose proposition. London will stand to lose, and we are not necessarily gaining. We are losing London as a financial center. That is clear. Everything around that is being done by the government in the UK to strike new trade deals, whether it is with Japan or probably with the US or anybody else, or even the one with the EU, will not replace the level of ease of doing business that they had, first of all, with the EU, the largest integrated market, and through the EU, with all the trade partners of the EU, of which the UK was part. So that is something that will be difficult to replace, and they will not get there, full stop. It will make life more difficult for citizens. John Marshall was before reciting all the changes for citizens. I think if you look at it in more detail, simply the fact that students will have to pay much higher tuition fees in both directions, so that studying in the UK for EU students or in the EU for UK students probably will not become an option anymore. This in and of itself is dramatic. Businesses as well. If you look at what the financial industry alone has had to spend in order to be able to continue to serve EU customers by setting up operations here and there. I think it was Bank of America that put out a number. It cost them 400 million alone to set up their Brexit alternative operations. On the other hand, what I also need to say is that obviously London is and will remain Europe's largest financial center. And that is not going to change after the 1st of January, nor for a very, very, very long time thereafter. There simply is such a strong, deep ecosystem in London that will not disappear overnight. What will disappear is the possibility of selling products or serving clients in the EU. But what will not disappear is that some clients, corporate clients, can come to London in order to take advantage of London's expertise, of London's capital markets, and so on. And I think for the future, even if for London there's a lot of business that will be lost, London can still remain at the very top. We heard this week Boris Johnson talk about green finance. Well, very happy. I mean, we obviously know that the UK is top of the class in that as well. I think we all need to be top of the class in this. But if you add the UK academic intellectual firepower plus the financial services expertise, I'm very optimistic for the UK to be playing a major role on an issue like that, which is a role for the future. And the same goes in many other areas. But still, the fact remains, there is nothing and nobody that can convince me that Brexit is in any way anything else than a lose-lose proposition.
Thank you, Nicolas. And Jérôme, Martin, I was wondering if you could maybe share your observations about those fees and the risk that they could increase and, you know, be shifted to clients or just I don't know, among the network of companies, because, well, with many moving operations outside, and then applying for additional licenses in other jurisdictions and shifting, you know, activities, still many companies keep duplicating roles in the UK. So it's, I mean, you know, the cost, I mean, like it's someone has to pay for it. So it's either the service cost will increase or the remunerations drop. What do you see in the market? How do your companies handle it? Martin, Jérôme, would you like to share?
Well, I think there will inevitably be some level of duplication of cost, but you know, I think this is probably going to be something which is overblown a little bit, because the kind of organisations we're talking about, you know, they're not going to put up with duplication of roles. It's simply, why would you bother? You know, you think about it in a sort of evolutionary context. If you've got something where you know, a function is duplicated, why have two people doing the same thing? You just get rid of one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that may be difficult to move where you have particular expertise, and that particular expertise does not want to move from London, which can be perfectly understandable for many reasons. But these firms that they will adapt, otherwise they will become uncompetitive because their competitors will adapt.
Do you think that there's some kind of opportunity for Eastern European countries, or Central European countries that probably have lower labor costs, or will it rather stay where it is now, like with expertise centers like Luxembourg, Frankfurt?
Well, perhaps as someone like Luxembourg attracts more of the value-add services within its borders, then firms will look elsewhere for the back office functions and other locations, and people already do that. You already have some service providers, for example, who have some of their back office functions, accounting, etc., in Eastern Europe or in the Baltic states. So this is already happening, and it may just happen even more as more value-add services are attracted to Luxembourg.
Mm-hmm. And Jérôme,
if I may briefly, I think that the costs that Nicolas mentioned are really organizational costs, structuring costs, and those, to my knowledge, will be borne by the players, not by the clients. But of course, it will drive a certain number of inefficiencies, as Martin says. For example, a number of asset managers will have to create UK funds to sell into the UK instead of using the Luxembourg fund that could be sold into UK, and vice versa. And that means that there will be less economies of scale, and that's where the clients might be losing, because you'll have several separate pools of assets that will have to be managed. But hopefully common sense will prevail, and over time, as in any divorce, maybe the first months or years will be difficult, but hopefully we'll find solutions, whether it's delegations, it's rationalizations, etc. But even if there's a no deal in the first stage, we can hope that over time common sense will prevail.
And I wanted to move over to James, because we have now, we all agree, I think, that it's a lose-lose deal or no deal. But is there anything, if you were to speak candidly, imagine that no one is listening, is there, any win for London, for the UK?
So I'm going to forget the 115 people your team have done superbly to attract.
Exactly.
It's a very good question. I suppose the starting point has to be for large chunks of the UK population, at the very least the majority in 2016, on the assumption they still agree with it, that the win has been a species of sovereignty, an idea of individualized decision making, which stems from inherently British ideas of parliamentary sovereignty and what have you, and then this notion that we've given that up. We joined what is an economic bloc, and it became a political bloc, and then it became a legal bloc, and actually we're gaining that back. I'm not saying that is my view or the BCC's view, but that is a line of what we're winning, and with that the economic effects are secondary. It's a question of managing them as best we can to win that prize above all prizes. So that is there, and for a lot of people that is a real win. Whether that translates into changes tomorrow, I don't know. Whether that is worth the price I fear they may be asked to pay, I also don't know. But I guess only time will tell. And I'm reminded ever so slightly of Zhu Enlai when asked, well, apocryphally, it was about the French Revolution. Apparently it's actually 1968. He just said it's too early to tell. So we'll find that out. This is not my only panel discussion on Brexit this week, although I think this is the most interesting and certainly the most august panel. And I've been asked on everyone, what are the advantages? And I'm still struggling. I suppose the best I've managed to come up with is that given that the UK's economy is quite different to other kind of power centres in Europe, it's a little bit more service orientated. It may be that the deals we can strike are better optimized for that particular kind of notion. So if you look at the trade deal with Japan, which is, I would say, very similar to the one that the EU has, the places where it does build up are on data and services a little bit. Having said that, it is clear to me that the centre of power in politics, which is driving the negotiation priorities, aren't really behind services. We would be dying in a ditch over services, not over fish, if that were the case. And so I wouldn't want to put too much weight upon that. And also there is the reality that the UK negotiates as an island of 60, 70 million people, educated, on the whole, quite economically active, with some problems, but I think broadly well respected, or at least we were. Whereas the EU negotiates as 500 million people of broadly the same kind of class of economic desire. And if we are moving to a world over 20 or 30 years where you have essentially economic hyperpowers in China and America and Europe, then the UK may well fall down the cracks, despite what we think of our history and what have you. Whether we can move something in that, whether we can become that nimbler, smaller player, is a really interesting question, and will be one of the drivers of success in the longer term. And we've slightly moved away from the idea of Singapore on sea, or at least Singapore in the North Sea. But certainly that was Jeremy Hunt when he was Foreign Secretary's line. One of the interesting points to note on that is that we don't have much higher corporate tax in Singapore. I think theirs is 17%, ours is largely 18%. And actually there are lots of ways that big multinationals massage what that corporate tax rate looks like, or do it perfectly lawfully. But it's actually how much you can switch your economy into a nimbler, more wealth creation mode, where you don't tax income in quite the same way as we do, and you certainly don't tax dividends from companies. That's where the real Singapore guess is. And also you have a lower regulatory regime, and you perhaps trade some of the expensive safety net we have in place. And I'm not comfortable the UK population is ready to make that trade-off, and I'm not sure it will be asked to. If we look at some of the stuff with the American trade deal, the one thing that comes up is chicken. Are we going to be forced to have food which we believe fundamentally is produced to a lower standard? And that's without getting into all sorts of jokes about the quality of British food. I live in London, it's different, it's better here. We've got enough French, German, Belgian chefs to make it just about tolerable. Also Luxembourgeois, of course. And as there are some wonderful places in the rest of the country, including Essex, where I come from. But I do worry that we are not ready as a population for that move, which leaves us arguably with the worst of all worlds, where we can't move into that nimble space where we're willing to make these deals, but equally we lose the punch and the heft and the engagement that the EU brings us. So that's a very roundabout way of saying I'm not entirely comfortable that we are going to be winning on a sovereignty argument, or at least not one that I think translates into the 21st century, but plenty disagree. And I do think we aren't doing an incredible job of mitigating the economic price we may well have to pay for that. But it's all up in the air. There are many very, very clever people working on this stuff, thinking it through, and I just hope they know it better than I do. But that is my half penny's worth.
Thanks, James. Martin, actually, on the topic that James touched on, the power game and the different allies and strategies. I remember in our earlier discussion, you mentioned that with Brexit, in a way, Luxembourg is losing an ally at EU level, in the sense that the UK has traditionally been unorthodox and anti-federalist, etc., which sometimes aligns with the Luxembourg's, business-oriented, nimble nimble attitude. How big is the risk? And I mean, like it's a question to all three of our Luxembourg panelists. How should Luxembourg address it? Nicolas, to you maybe from the let's say more diplomatic level, and Martin and Jérôme on the business side.
Well, I wouldn't characterize the UK's approach as unorthodox, just Anglo-Saxon. But yeah, we in Luxembourg have lost a significant ally within the EU, because the UK has quite often taken the flak as being, the awkward child in the EU family, and has tempered some of the more federalist leanings of some of the other larger countries. The idea of federal Europe is just anathema in the UK. I guess that could be part of the reason for the Brexit decision. But in the future, I think, as James has said a few times, who knows what's going to happen in the future? We don't know what the diplomatic relationship between the UK and the EU will be. It's not conceivable that the UK is simply just going to walk away, because it has a market of 500 million people 30 miles from its coast. So it will be trying, the UK, I'm sure, will be trying to influence how the EU evolves, for example, in financial services. So we're not losing the UK completely. It's just that the UK will no longer have a seat at the table or a vote. But I think we'd be perhaps unwise to discount the influence that they could potentially have as, either the fifth or the sixth largest economy in the world at the moment. But having said that, we still do have, other allies around the EU. Ireland, for example, again, another small country, not as small as us, but there are other countries which would take that, I suppose, business-friendly attitude towards regulation. So, and bearing in mind, every country still has one vote, irrespective of how large they are. But obviously, I'm aware of the real politic about this. So yes, it'll certainly change the dynamic in the EU going forward. But I don't think we can discount the influence of the UK going forward in the future.
And Jérôme, and what would your take be on this point? Will we see more, let's say, strategic alliances with, I don't know, Netherlands, Ireland, the more business-oriented countries?
I hope so. I like to say that unfortunately Brexit leaves us with the Germans and the French, and that is not particularly comfortable, because we already see that today. The UK is obviously less involved in a number of discussions. The French tend to take the lead when it suits them. Fortunately, the Germans will then try to counterbalance and have their interests prevail, but in a way they sort of let the French take a number of initiatives. And then Martin is right, each country has a vote, but in investment funds, for example, what we see at the European level, at some European regulators level, ESMA, is that unfortunately a vast majority of European countries don't have a financial sector, or they at least don't have a fund industry. And therefore that they don't really care, they're not interested. And so that is not great, because for something which is absolutely key to the European economy, to countries like Ireland or Luxembourg, at the end of the day, you have too many small countries that just follow with one ear and just vote with the largest countries. And that is not sound. Now, again, I really hope that we will have that French-German counterpower, and that indeed a number of countries like Luxembourg or Ireland will manage to create a sufficiently critical mass to be able to weigh in on key decisions.
And Nicolas, with your broad diplomatic background, how to pair the two, that, on one hand with Ireland that, each of you have mentioned, on one hand, of course, Luxembourg is competing for the fund industry, for the funds business, at the same time, to align and, push together how to make it happen, that, competing, but being aligned.
Well, I had been roughly after the referendum also relatively pessimistic at the prospect of losing an ally of weight such as the United Kingdom when it was going to come to regulatory issues. I think if we look a little bit beyond the immediate fear of seeing the UK leave the table, you have to somewhere hope that ultimately those countries, and some in particular that have been very active and very vocal when it came to attracting business and showing off their pro-business attitude, their business pragmatism and their business here and there, that these countries, once they have attracted business quite successfully, will also in the future then look after the interests of the business they have attracted, and not only or not revert to their inner demons of protectionism and so on. So I think that little by little, you probably see that the transformation that these Brexit relocations might have brought about in the structure of the financial services industry in Europe, and in some countries more than in others because they were concentrated on some countries, will also trickle down to the negotiating positions that these countries will take on certain financial services related negotiations. I think it will take time, but I'm quite confident that ultimately large financial institutions that have decided to set up here or there will also be able to make their voices heard within the bureaucracies and within the power centers of those countries that have managed to attract them. So I am less pessimistic today than I was in 2016.
And how about, like in the same spirits, because now the relations are based on the hopefully on equivalence. If we see reciprocity from Europe, as the ambassador mentioned at the beginning, and delegation agreements. But at the same time, ESMA has been pushing for some time already, to centralize the supervision, or at least to have more of a, let's say, more of a say in how countries organize the supervision. We know that the CSSF is also very adamant in making sure that there are no letterbox companies in Luxembourg, and there are a lot of controls, etc. But should we? Is it really a risk, even if remote? But at what stage should we start thinking about what happens if the delegation agreements are no longer in place? What's the worst case scenario?
I think you're jumping a little bit ahead of yourself there. Obviously, centripetal forces in Europe have existed ever since the coal and steel community was created. Create a central entity, and that central entity wants to increase its role and increase its power, increase its size, and so on. That's just a normal phenomenon. In this particular case, add to it that there were aligned interests between ESMA, the Commission, maybe even the European Parliament, all these centripetal proponents, plus a large member state who happens to host ESMA and so on. But I don't think that battle is done, or certainly not lost. There was a first round, and in that first round, I think the industry also came out relatively clearly, vocally, and made sure that that first round went to the defendants of delegation. We will see how the second round goes, but I think one shouldn't make this only about Luxembourg or Ireland. It is an industry issue. If you look at it, I mean, the American Investment Fund Association, ICI, some Asian associations have made their voices heard about it. So one should stop making this a Luxembourg issue, but really it's an industry issue. And ultimately, I think those voices will be heard. There will be some sort of accommodation. I think what you will see ultimately at the end of the day is not centralization, but convergence of the way rules are being applied. Probably a little bit of centralization on this or that, but not the way it has been planned and commented on.
And Jérôme, Martin, are you equally calm and hopeful? Or do you have, let's say, more, a different view?
I am, but to be clear, it is less what we currently see as delegations than a number of functions that are closer to support. It's the fact that valuations for funds are still done in the UK or in the US, that risk management is often done there to a large part, finance, etc. All these functions that currently are not strictly speaking a delegation, and therefore don't really need to be based in the EU. But indeed, there are certain countries trying to change the rules so that at least a certain portion of those functions be carried out from the EU. But as Nicolas was saying, I agree with him. I think fortunately, it is unlikely that this position will prevail. I think, and if it were to prevail, it would be very unfortunate because it would not be driven by efficiency. It would not be driven by the fact that there could be a problem or a lack of oversight or whatever. It would be purely political, and it would be purely a matter of certain countries hoping to attract more business to their jurisdiction to the detriment of the end clients.
If you agree, I would like to finish on this positive note. We managed to find a positive or optimistic, at least, conclusion. I would like to thank you very much for sharing your insights. Now we still have 10 minutes for questions, so I would like to hand over to Sarah, who will moderate the questions and answers. And thank you once again, James, Martin, Jérôme, Nicolas, for your time today.
Thank you very much, Zuzanna. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sarah Speed, and I'm chair of the Financial Services Group at the Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to thank everybody who has been submitting questions both before this evening's session and also whilst the panelists have been talking. We've had a lot of questions on a wide variety of subjects. And my first question for the panel is, what pain points is Brexit causing for the Luxembourgish economy, particularly in financial services, but also perhaps in other sectors? And I'm thinking particularly of businesses who may be importing and exporting into the UK. Do you have any comments? Perhaps if I start with Nicolas.
Well, I think James mentioned one of our main export products, Luxembourg wine. I have always been intrigued by the love that many Brits have for Luxembourg wine, which is great, fantastic. We can only encourage it. I know that Ambassador John Marshall has certainly contributed during his tenure here in Luxembourg to that. I think he deserves certainly a case of wine, of the best one, to take home with him. No, I mean, honestly, anybody involved in economic relations between the UK and Luxembourg / the EU will find that his or their life will be more complicated come January 1st, unless, of course, I mean, I don't know the details of the trade agreement, but I don't think that it will make life really as easy as it currently is. So that's the only simple answer I can give you. I mean, if you look at, I don't know, Cargolux or anybody involved, you will have to go sector by sector, see who are the big exporters, probably ArcelorMittal that is producing steel in Luxembourg, Guardian, DuPont, all the big exporters, they will find their life complicated.
Thank you very much, Nicolas.
And don't forget the supply chains for all of them and the other way around. So car components and so on. Yeah, there's a car industry in the UK. Luxembourg has quite a number of very highly performing car component producers. All of them will find their life difficult. If you take standardization, certification of cars and of their components, well, it's certainly not going to be easier.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's another comment from one of our audience in terms of procurement and supply chain management and project management. These are all areas where skills are really going to be needed in the months and years to come to manage those changes. Another question, this is perhaps, we've had a lot of questions around citizenship. So this is perhaps for Ambassador Marshall, if you're still there, John.
I am, and unmuted.
Is there any news on the rights of free movement or residence for UK citizens who already have permanent resident status here in Luxembourg?
So, I mean, that's a reference to the fact that with the withdrawal agreement, basically the rights that were guaranteed were the rights to live and work in the country of residence. Freedom of movement rights will come to an end at the end of the transition period. As I said earlier, we are introducing a new points-based system. And for EU nationals travelling to the UK, which will allow them to travel for short visits for up to 6 months without a visa, and UK nationals will be bound by EU immigration laws. That'll be the situation from the 1st of January.
We've also had several questions about in the area of education and recognition of UK, well, in both UK degrees in Europe and vice versa. Can you comment on that?
So there, it depends. I mean, if you fall within the scope of the withdrawal agreement, so if, for example, you're a UK national who is resident here and you have a qualification that has already been recognised locally, then that is that remains recognised. You can continue to, work as you've been doing before. There are lots of qualifications that are governed by, other processes, Bologna process, for example. So if you have a degree in a non-regulated area, history, English, or whatever, that will be recognised under that system. If you're in a regulated profession, then that is, mutual recognition of professional qualifications is part of the ongoing negotiations, and we'll have to see what is agreed there. But if the questioner is based in Luxembourg already, living in Luxembourg, there will be no change, provided that that qualification has already been recognised locally, which if they're practicing, it should have been.
Okay, Thank you. And perhaps just to provide some comfort to some of the audience that if they want to go to the UK for a weekend or to visit a client in the UK, they will still be able to go without a visa, from what you said at the start of the meeting.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Perhaps a question for you, but also for the panel, if they would like to comment. If the UK Parliament passes the Internal Market Bill, which contravenes the withdrawal agreement, will any deal be possible?
Sarah, shall I jump in to say,
yes,
John, having comment on domestic politics, which is potentially yes. a bit unfair. So, okay. I'm sorry, I'm not saying you were being unfair. It would be unfair of me not to jump in on this. So the Internal Markets Bill started life as a little bit of the technical plumbing required to repatriate powers. It's at its heart about, we're bringing some things back that used to be done at the EU level. How do we balance them within the UK? So what bits do the devolved authorities do versus the Westminster Parliament? And then there are a couple of clauses in there which there is an argument about the extent to which they breach the withdrawal agreement, and the government has given slightly different analyses, but I think the question proceeds from the basis that they are in direct contravention, certainly of international law and arguably of the UK Ministerial Code. And at that point, I think it probably becomes political rather than technical legal. My feeling is based on what the Irish government have said and other people have said, and the impact on the Northern Irish, the Good Friday Agreement, which essentially governs relations between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So on the island of Ireland, which has been fairly tricky for 150 years or so, I think that the odds of a deal are reduced considerably, to put it mildly. And I think also it's clear that this is an area where the shift in political gravity in the US we've seen, again, subject to legal challenge, but I think that's probably fairly minimal, does make things considerably more difficult. I think this president would have a much less amenable attitude to it. But it does depend on those things, and the UK government has what it deems respectable arguments that the changes within the bill itself, which I must say haven't been passed, and I think at the moment have been taken out by the second chamber, the House of Lords, do comply. The question is what you do under those bits. So they work to give powers to the government to do things. They don't necessarily do things in their own right. So it's a little bit up in the air, but I would say that as a political step, it might make things considerably more difficult. But I say that as an interested bystander rather than someone directly involved in the process.
Thank you very much, James. I think we're just about out of time. I'm sorry we can't go through everybody's questions, but I would like to thank again the panel for their contribution this evening. And with that, I will hand back to Dan, just to close.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think in the name of the 117 people who has assisted this webinar, I would like to thank everyone for your insights, your expertise, and for your availability to share your perspective on this. So, Zuzanna, thank you very much for an outstanding moderation of this roundtable. Really was a pleasure to work together with you and Luxembourg Times. Ambassador Marshall, Nicolas, Martin, Jérôme, James, thanks a lot for participating. And I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to talk about this again. So probably in December and yet again, maybe in January or in the weeks to come. So thank you very much. Already now, I wish you a very pleasant end of the year. It's 6 weeks away. Let's see how COVID is going to evolve. Let me say maybe a quick word for what's going to happen in the weeks to come. So you've seen we had a number of virtual conferences over the last weeks and months. We had to adapt at the British Chamber of Commerce to the sanitary crisis, and we had really some amazing conferences over those weeks. You can watch most of them in replay on our YouTube channel. but there is still more to come. We're not finished yet. So I would like to invite all of you on the November 26th. We have the pleasure with the BCC UK. We've been invited by the BCC UK to participate in the prestigious leadership program. So on November 26th, there will be a conference between Dr. Adam Marshall, who's Director General of BCC UK, together with Philip Hammond, former Chancellor of the Exchequer and Foreign Secretary. They're going to talk about tackling the economic challenges of coronavirus and the end of the UK transition period. So as I'm sure you've been interested by this topic, it might be very well that you're going to be interested by their perspective on all of that. So please go to bcc.lu, upcoming events, and you're going to find the link where you can register to participate in this event. I think it's going to be highly interesting. Then on a more leisurely note, unfortunately, we have a tradition at the BCC. Every year we have our traditional Christmas lunch, which is a huge success every year. We have more than 250 people who attend. Unfortunately, we cannot do that this year. So we've been trying to find a way to on our social media profiles, a couple of information also on our website. I'm happy to announce the 12 Days of Christmas by the BCC. So between December 3rd and December 18th, we'll have 12 evening events, all online, which will be a little bit more casual. So we're going to start on December 3rd with the very famous KPMG Gin Bar. At our Christmas lunch, the gin bar is always a very well-attended event at the end of the lunch. It really goes into the evening. Well, we'll have an evening with gin tasting. So you can register. You're going to get a set of bottles, and you can taste gin. That's going to be on December 3rd. And then we're going to have a number of other events. We're going to have a cooking show. We're going to have a cocktail show. We're going to have music. We're going to have Jean Müller, Luxembourg piano player, is going to play a concert for us, etc. So please do not hesitate. Go to our website, take a look at the program, and register. So we all have a couple of fun moments together before the end of the year. On this positive note from my side, thank you very much, everyone, again, and stay safe, and hope to see all of you very soon. Bye-bye.